Do you see Carl? Oops.
You ever throw a party and nobody came?
Oops, I gotta be careful. I'm getting feedback, and we are live, and we have now 19 people joined.
Oh, great. Hey, folks, if you before we get started here, if you want to go into the chat and say hi, so I can see everybody's name. Hey, Kevin. Good to see from you. I think you've probably been through this this presentation a few times, so you can see if I'm consistent. All right, we got the Smithsonian in the house. Ah, Appalachian State. I got some in-laws that teach up there. Ah, there you go, John. I know John Warsing. That's cool to see you. As we get everybody in the webinar here, this is Carl's voice you hear. I've never used Zoom for a webinar before, but it looks like it's a pretty good system here. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you've got questions or comments or anything, please do go into the chat and type it out. I'll be paying attention to that. I might not get to everybody's question, but at the very least, I can see what you're thinking, and that can help me you know, maneuver the webinar today to see, make sure we're talking about what you all want to hear. But I'll leave it up to Mike Perry there to tell me when to get started.
Hey, if you want to just drop the slide for a second.
Sure.
Let them see my smiling face here. I'm Mike Perry. I'm the executive director of the Army Heritage Center Foundation, which is the Friends group for the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center. And we're proud to host these programs. This is the second in a series that we're going to be running it weekly for folks who are stuck at home doing the stay-at-home order and staying healthy. But we're looking at an opportunity both to educate the public and others on what the resources are available at the center and other aspects of U.S. military history. Today we're proud, as you've already heard his voice, to have feature Karl Warner. Karl is the historian educator at the Visitor Education Center at the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center. And today he's going to talk about some of the resources that are available for both educators and I'll plug in, and parents looking to also educate their children while they're at home. So at this time, I'd like to let Karl take over the program. Thanks for joining us, and please provide your feedback.
All right, folks. Let's see here. Can I? Looks like we got a slide up. Give me 1 second to get my bearings here. All right. Somebody tell me in the chat room. Can you see my face, or are we looking at a slide that says Army Heritage? All right, you can see me. Good stuff. All right. So again, as Mike said, I'm Karl Warner. I work at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle. Just judging from the names I've seen going by on the chat, I know most of you know who we are out at the AHEC. But I think it's a good idea to start my webinar today talking about just what the AHEC is, what we do, and especially my theme for today is to talk about how I, as the educator at AHEC, work with teachers, just like Kevin Wagner that I saw in the chat room, to get the Army's history out to the classrooms. We'll talk about a few different resources we have that are geared specifically towards educators. And of course, when I say educators, I'm talking about the wide array of folks who get out there and educate different audiences. We find ourselves, our materials be useful by adult educators, K through 12 educators, especially military educators. So as we get into this, keep in mind how you in your organization might use this material to educate. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up my slides here. There we go. see if I can't continue to see the chat room. All right, once I get a hang of this Zoom thing, we'll be looking good. You can see down there, I'll leave that up for just a moment. If you want to jot down my email address, feel free to get back to me afterwards via email. Let me know who you are and what you're looking for, and we'll be able to help you out. And again, my job at the Army Heritage and Education Center is to take care of the education programming across the board for both public, military, and K through 12 university levels. Oh, it looks like you're not seeing my slides here. Can anybody, let me hear from you. Are you seeing my face or slides? Okay, there we go. Now we're to slides. All right, so again, you can see both. Excellent, so I gotta watch my facial expressions then. All right, so like I said, if you wanna grab that email address there, and then we'll move right along. All right, so as many of you know, but those of you who are not familiar with us, the Army Heritage and Education Center, of course, is the Army's archives. We also have a big museum component. Our conservation center is state of the art. We're up there with the top conservation centers in the country. And of course, our primary, our motto is telling the Army's story one soldier at a time. So that leads to see part of our mission is to preserve and tell the soldier's story, the individual story throughout Army history. We are located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We'd love to see you once all this COVID-19 thing is over with. Come see us and see especially our museum and our events outside. Normally we have over 4,000 students a year come through for our outdoor field trip program. Unfortunately, this year we've had to cancel those field trips, but I will tell you, hot off the presses here, tomorrow I start recording a virtual field trip to get out to those classes that are still trying to teach online. So hopefully within a week or so, we'll have a virtual field trip of our Army Heritage Trail outdoor exhibits ready to go for folks. And then of course, down there at the bottom of the slide, you can see the outreach and support for educators. Again, this goes back to my primary mission. Oh, let's see if we can go back there. Oh no, I gotta figure out how to go back instead of forward. There we go. All right, still getting the hang of this, guys. Okay, so anyway, Army Heritage and History is an educational tool. We'll talk about how we can use the heritage and history of the soldiers who have served in the United States Army in the classroom. We'll look a little bit at the primary source resources we have curated specifically for educators at the AHEC. That's the Educators Toolbox. And then I'm going to go a little bit into interpreting military history. This is a great exercise I do with teachers, especially when I'm in a classroom with them, or I have a group of teachers at the AHEC through our partnership with the National Council on History Education. How can we as historians help educators to interpret that military history they're using in their classroom? Teachers are busy people, very, very busy. They don't always have the opportunity and time to really read the background material that us historians can read to truly interpret how this military history they're using in the classroom fits with the overall social, political, economic history that they're teaching. So that's one thing we do here at the AHEC, and that a lot of our colleagues do across the country, is to help those teachers interpret military history. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how I do that with teachers. One using a primary source document that is kind of famous to our collection, and another using just very simple posters from World War I and World War II and other artwork. And then, of course, finally, I'll go over a little bit of the professional development that we offer to teachers specifically, but also educators in the wider community. So I'm looking forward to talking about all those different items. All right, moving right along. And again, if you have specific questions that you want me to hit on or things to look at, please be sure to put those in the chat room. All right, so let's talk about Army history as an education tool. When I'm talking to teachers, when I'm talking to my different audiences, who are those audiences in the first place? Obviously, at the Army Heritage and Education Center, one of our primary audiences is the United States Army soldiers, especially educators. Our team regularly goes down to Fort Indian Town Gap, down to Fort Bragg, different posts along the East Coast, to teach soldiers in the classroom, soldiers in the various Army schools, those wider themes in history. Nowadays, there's a term you might hear going around, especially in military circles, the historically minded soldier. And that's what we're really trying to accomplish with our audience of soldiers, is getting them to better understand the history and heritage of where they come, and how that can help them, that understanding can help them become a historically minded soldier, and see where they came from and how that's going to change them in the future. So you can see the themes are fairly simple to understand, but history really allows us to teach this stuff. Primarily, of course, leadership. Take a group of soldiers to Gettysburg or Antietam or one of the other battlefields here in this region. Leadership's obviously one of the very first things that we can take a look at. Personal relationships. A lot of folks don't realize just how important how important it is to teach the importance of personal relationships to soldiers. And military history can help teach that idea of personal relationships for soldiers. A soldier has to serve with a lot of different people. They're part of a very wide organization. And those personal relationships, the personal relationships in history, think of things like Patton and Bradley, or Lee and Longstreet. You can see how understanding that stuff in the theme of history can help a soldier. And then, of course, tactical and operational. Oh, let's go back here. Tactical, operational decision making, strategic decision making. These are all topics we can teach to soldiers. We also use Army history as an education tool, of course, for the American public. That's one of our, as part of the visitor and education team here at the AHEC, that's one of our primary missions, is to help educate the American public on the Army's history and heritage and how that relates to them as an American. You can see I've got a note there, bridging the civil military gap. Many of you out there that are teachers understand how a lot of our students, especially in those high school years, don't have a connection to the United States Army or the military in general. They don't have an uncle or an aunt or a grandfather or a parent that has served in the military. And by coming to the AHEC, by going into our webinars, by going onto our website, they can learn a little bit more about the service and sacrifice of our service people, especially the United States Army soldier. And that can help bridge that civil military gap, which of course helps down the line when folks are looking at military academies or joining one of the services. And of course, we've also got a ton of physical education programs there on site at the AHEC. Museum exhibits, plenty of teachers integrate our museum exhibits into their classroom. We get hundreds of thousands of people at the AHEC each year to see our museum. Public lectures, let me tell you, that's been a tough one for me the last few weeks, trying to get our lectures online so that we can do those streaming. And then, of course, our big events that are geared towards the public in general. And then, of course, finally, the theme for today's talk is, how does the USAHEC support our education audience? So if you don't mind, anybody who is here and has access to the chat, if you are an actual educator, whether you're an educator for another organization like the AHEC or a teacher, please just shoot a message into the chat room and let me see kind of what percentage we have here that are educators as I go on. Oh, cool. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next slide here. All right, so I want to do a quick introduction. If you want to follow along on your computer, we have a pretty amazing Let me open it up here on my other computer so I can follow along as well. You can see the link there, our Educators Toolbox. The Educators Toolbox is specifically designed for you educators, for you teachers. When you go in, you'll see that, that we have taken the time and effort to curate specific items that we think teachers can use right away. Again, teachers are busy. I don't need to tell you all just what an overload of material is out there, whether it's Library of Congress or Pritzker or Gilder Lehrman or a million other different options that are out there. And I wanted to make sure that we have something up that if you decide you need Army history, you have someplace easy that you can go and browse through and find material that you can use in your classroom. So if you are able to go to that LibGuides Ed Toolbox website that I have up there on my slide, you'll notice that we have several different options on things that you can take a look at. The main one you're going to want to look at is our resources by era page. If you go to scroll down through those, you can see we have a chunk of materials we've pulled out that have all been put together either by a teacher like you or one of our teacher interns. Each summer, we have a couple teachers that come in and intern for us, and they put together lesson plans. Also, we have a ton of primary sources in here. So because later on I'm going to be talking about World War II, let's go ahead and go into the World War II page if you are able to on your own. But for those of you who aren't actually looking at the toolbox, the very first thing that comes up is a list of primary sources that you can use fairly easily in your classroom. For example, the very first primary source that's downloadable there as a PDF is the phone log for the soldier who sat on the headquarters desk the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed up there at Schofield Barracks. So as Pearl Harbor was being raided and Hickam Field was being raided, we can look at the all the phone calls that soldier was getting from all over the island as Pearl Harbor was being bombed. What a great way to introduce a unit on Pearl Harbor or on World War II. See what kind of messages were coming in, the chaos that was coming into this soldier's office as he was answering the phone to try to figure out what was going on. As you scroll down, you can see we have different planning documents from Operation Overlord, a good way to, complete with maps and other items, a good way to take a look at specific military materials as you're teaching that particular unit. Another great piece as we go down the Christmas letter from Major General Ridgway. You can see how okay, so those of you in the chat that are asking about the screen, there's no way for me to get out of this program to go to that screen. If you have the ability to go into that toolbox, you can see this material by either clicking on it or looking at it on another screen. We'll be off this in just a second, get back to the slides. But like I said, unfortunately, I can't navigate between the slides and the actual website that I have linked there. So anyway, the toolbox itself is a fantastic spot to find all different primary sources, lesson plans, etc., so that you can find what you need in the classroom depending on what era you're teaching. We have vignettes, small stories that you can use in the classroom as activators. Yes, that's a very good point, Lynn, in the chat room. If you minimize your view of the slides and click on that link that I have on the slide right now, you can go to use your browser to look at this toolbox that we're talking about. And as we go through the rest of the webinar here, feel free to poke around in there and see what we've got. Various lesson plans, videos, lectures that pertain to those resources. We also have materials on how to set up professional development for fellow teachers. You can look at how to set up a field trip here at the AHEC. and also contact us via social media and request materials get posted to this toolbox. And that's really the power of the toolbox, is as teachers use our materials, as teachers design lesson plans around our primary source materials, they send it back to me and we get that posted up here to the Educators Toolbox. All right, let me move on here to the next slide. So again, feel free to poke around that toolbox. You can always email me if you're looking for specific materials you want to use in the classroom, and the link to email me, of course, is in the toolbox as well. So we moved on to the next slide here, the primary sources resource. If you're looking for Army materials specifically, come see us. What sort of things can you get from us as an educator that you can use, whether it's in the classroom or for projects? The Army's history. Obviously, that's the primary thing that we've got here at the AHEC. And you can go with specific military history. I like to make the comment when I'm talking with teachers at different conferences and such, that the Army's history is not just military history. We do have the materials about the battles and the wars and the politics surrounding the actual fighting, the blood and guts, if you will, of military history. But the Army's history is not just that drums and guns, so to speak, of military history. It's also civics. It's also American history in general. It's the social history of the United States. There is a great deal of history that can be explored through the United States Army's experience that can speak to a lot of different other parts of what you're teaching in history, not just the battles. And I think that list that I've got there is a good example. Citizen soldiers, the use of force, the role of the commander-in-chief. We talk about the presidents quite a bit these days, and the power of the president. But what is the role of commander-in-chief mean, especially to the United States Army? World and American history. Conflict and war drive almost every aspect of the United States history. We're either at a war or we're in between wars. In the 1950s, when Truman pushed for racial integration in the Army, the United States Army had been integrating in one way or another for many years, even before that. Same thing with women's suffrage. There's folks and books out there that'll tell you, and you can see it in the primary sources, that the women's suffrage movement started a great deal both during the Civil War and World War I, especially in World War I, as women began to get more and more into the workplace. The social evolution and revolution throughout the 19th and 20th century, all the way through to the 80s and 90s, can be seen in the U.S. Army, can be reflected in the U.S. Army's history. And then, of course, there's STEM. You need physics to shoot artillery, you know, and we have artillery manuals going back to before the French and Indian War. Science, the medical corps has a tremendous amount of material at the AHEC. I had a group of university professors that were looking for specific materials on medicine during World War I. We were able to find them a manual, and part of that manual explained how World War I surgeons would extract chunks of pieces of metal out of soldiers' eyes, shrapnel metal out of soldiers' eyes, by using powerful magnets. A whole manual just on how to use magnets to pull metal dust and shards out of a soldier's eye. So a great deal of material on the history of medicine there. Same thing with weather. You know, the Army has to know what the weather is. The Army has an entire meteorological corps that works on that sort of thing. And of course, a lot of that primary source material is there at the AHEC. Industrialization, technological innovation, a lot of that technological innovation starts with the United States Army or the armed forces in general, and then leaches over into the greater commercial aspects of our country, and the other way around. So you can get a lot of technology history there in our collections. Teachers can use that material to explain where different trends in technology, commerce, and the fit places where those two concepts touch on the history of the United States, to show where those ideas started. And of course, engineering, that's definitely one we've had teachers use quite a bit. The U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center holds all of the Army's what we call superseded military publications. Now, what does that mean? That mouthful mean? Superseded military publications are all of the technical manuals, the pamphlets, the field manuals, etc., that the Army has published. When one of those documents, technical manuals or field manuals, goes out of date and the Army has a new version, the old version comes to the Army Heritage and Education Center. So if you want to see one of the earliest combustion engines the Army used, well, we have the technical manual for that. So across the board, whatever the technology or concepts that the Army uses, you can find that material in those manuals. So those are just some examples of different primary source resources we have at the AHEC that teachers have used repeatedly as we've been able to help them out. All right, so then we get into interpretation. One of my favorite parts of my job is working with teachers to help them interpret the materials that they pull from our collections. If all of you can see this, you can actually download this document from our toolbox that you saw the link to earlier. So what is this document? Where would we use this in the classroom? How does this document, why does this document matter to us? We know military history. We can help the teachers interpret this material and figure out the best ways to use it in their classroom. So take just a moment, look hard at this document, and if anybody who doesn't already know can take a guess in the chat room and tell me, what do you think this is? As we look through it, as a teacher puts this down in front of their kids, in front of their students, how are they going to utilize this material without anything to start off with? And that's where we can come in and help, is with that interpretation. So a few things that we can see right there from the beginning. If you look up in the top right-hand corner, this document was only approved for public release in 2012. So that tells us, even though it looks pretty old, it must have been something that's fairly secret. As you move down, you start seeing names. There's a bunch of signatures up in the top left-hand corner. Some of them you can't read. But then you come down, the first printed name there is Dr. Norman Ramsey. Well, we can go and go online and figure out who that was. Down a little bit further, you can see that signed name down there is Farrell. We see some other names, Parsons and Tibbetts. But by the time you've seen Tibbetts, you probably figured out at least what this document has to do with. So where does that interpretation come in? Well, teachers have to know some things before they can teach this document. For example, what is a hand receipt? Ask many a teacher if they know what a hand receipt is, they're going to tell you they don't know. Well, it turns out that everything in the United States Army, and really in the military in general, has to be signed for. You have to sign a document saying that, okay, this object that you're giving me is mine now, and I'm responsible for it until I turn it back in. And that might be the gun that the Army issues you. That could be the computer that I'm using over here that the Army issued me. It could be your combat boots or the backpack you're wearing or anything else that the Army issues you. When the Army issues you an item, you have to sign for it. The piece of paper you sign is called a hand receipt. So by understanding what a hand receipt is, now we can maybe understand a little bit more about this document. Same thing about chain of responsibility. Why is that important? Well, again, in the military, any object that is important has to have a chain of responsibility. And that those hand receipts can establish a chain of responsibility. Who has been in charge of the object that has been signed for in that chain of responsibility. So if you're thinking about chain of responsibility and hand receipt, as you look at those names, you can see Norman Ramsey. Well, Norman Ramsey, it turns out, was one of the main physicists in the Manhattan Project. He was actually the physicist in charge of building Little Boy itself before it was shipped from California to Tinian Island to be loaded on the Enola Gay. So you can see, I have personally received from Dr. Norman Ramsey the material identified below. As you go down, you can see the signature of the person that is receiving that material is Farrell. A little bit more of breaking things down, and you have General Farrell is the commander at Tinian Island, where the Enola Gay was stationed. And of course, most folks know that the Enola Gay was the airplane that carried the atomic bomb Little Boy. Move on down, and you can see where General Farrell has made some notes. So he's signed now this hand receipt for the material from Norman Ramsey. And we can see he's explained a little bit. The above materials were carried by Parsons, Tibbets, and company to Hirohito's part of Doomsday, leaving Tinian at 5:16 in the morning. So projectile unit containing blank kilograms of enriched, and I can't pronounce that word, at an average concentration of. So by this time, we've probably figured out that this is the hand receipt for the fissile material that goes inside the Little Boy. This is the hand receipt for Little Boy, the first atomic bomb. And you can see something was removed. So again, a little bit more interpretation here. They didn't just redact the concentration of uranium in the bomb. They actually cut it completely out of the paper. That's how classified this material was. So again, going through this material is how us here at the Army Heritage and Education Center can help teachers understand the primary sources that they're downloading and using from our collections. And that's a service we offer to teachers as they contact us. Of course, one thing we always talk about when we're looking at primary sources is take everything with a grain of salt. The material, what you see written on the screen right there is actually from after Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. Commander Parsons, who was the weaponeer of the Enola Gay, a naval officer that was basically the security officer for the bomb itself, wrote in his handwriting, "I certify that the above material was expended to the city of Hiroshima, Japan at 9:15 on 6 August. Now, as we look at that writing, and we look up the actual date and time, the bomb was dropped at 8:15 on 6 August, not 9:15 local time. So that right there being a very extremely primary source written by the guy who actually was in charge of the physical bomb itself, was off by an hour on the time it was dropped. Now, the reason why he was off is because he was in an airplane, and in the Army airplanes, well, in any military aircraft, they generally go by the time zone where they took off, not the time zone where they're operating. So he was writing down the time from Tinian Island where the Enola Gay aircraft took off, not the local time in Hiroshima when they dropped the bomb. So again, if you're interpreting this material and you see 9:15, that might throw you off unless you're able to interpret that material. So again, we can work with teachers to do that. So I think it's pretty neat looking at that document here, and I'll go back here so you can see the whole thing, this hand receipt for Little Boy, and how you can break it down, talk about the different individuals that were involved with the Manhattan Project, like Ramsey and Farrell, talk about the individual crew members of the Enola Gay, like Parsons and Tibbets. Up here on the top left, as you continue to look at the signatures up there, those are all signatures that General Farrell collected on this document after the action, almost as a souvenir, folks that were involved with the program. So an interesting piece of U.S. Army history. of American history and of course of world history, and a lot that can be used in the classroom there. So that's one example of how I would sit down with a teacher, sit down with an educator, and talk through a document that they might be looking to use in their classroom. And here's another set of materials that a lot of teachers absolutely love to use, and that we get a lot of questions about the interpretation thereof. What do these different items mean? Now, all of these are World War I and World War II era posters. The Army Heritage and Education Center holds a great deal of original artwork from the United States Army's history, and many of those are the originals or first printings of various recruitment posters, asking for monetary help, of course, you know, like bond drives and things like this. And these are three items that are all on the toolbox I showed you earlier that the teachers really enjoy using. The first one is probably my favorite because my namesake, my great-grandfather, was actually in the tank corps in World War I. And if you look at that, it's interesting. So very easy to use that in a classroom, especially if you're teaching about tanks or about World War I in general, especially recruiting. But let's break it down a little bit. Why a black cat? Teachers have asked me that before. Why a black cat? And if you are talking about the history of technology, the history of how things like all the innovations that went into tank development started in the first place, it turns out that the very first tank unit in the United States Army was an engineering unit, and their mascot was a black cat, specifically a coal black tomcat. So of course it shows the fury of the big, mean, angry tomcat. When that engineer unit got turned into a tank unit, the tankers were very happy to take over that that mascot. The idea, and this is straight from the soldiers, some of the soldiers that were in that first tank unit, that the tomcat, according to tankers, was peaceful until it was kicked, and once it was kicked, it then became wild and attacked. And the tankers were wild and a furious response of Americans during World War I. So again, a little bit of background on why the black cat as far as the tanks are concerned during World War I. The second poster there is actually from 1941, not from World War I, just before World War II, but it was specifically designed in the format and in the design, to have the look of the World War I recruiting posters. It's a World War I recruiting, or it's World War I soldier wearing a World War I uniform, maybe later in the war or just after the war, and it's calling back to that heroism and glory that soldiers felt during and after World War I in 1918 and helping to win that war. At the time, many Americans saw involvement in World War II as inevitable, and the recruiters were using that concept, that idea of the glory of World War I to help with that initial recruiting, getting ready to join in with World War II. And then, of course, the last one is probably one of the most famous and heart-wrenching recruiting posters. This is, of course, a drowning woman holding her child. This came out just after the Lusitania was sunk. The idea to pull on the heartstrings of men across the country to get them to enlist so that their family wouldn't be the one drowning after another boat sunk. So again, three very different propaganda posters with very different themes, but all that can be interpreted and looked at in different ways to try to grab potential soldiers in different ways, and makes a very good, makes a good basis for a conversation in class to talk to the students about the different ways that we recruit soldiers into the Army. The next set of materials that I've talked over with teachers before and helped with teachers before is a series of art from and I can never pronounce this guy's first name, but Muirhead Bone. Now, he was a war correspondent and artist for the British. He was actually the very first appointed war artist for the British. He believed very much in the importance of realistic artwork. He was sent to battlefields all over, all during the war, and especially was famous for drawing the aftermath of these horrendous battles. His artwork went all over the world to show folks in an age where it was very difficult to get photographs out quickly and efficiently, just what warfare looked like and felt like during World War I. His style was specifically to show the desolation that the soldiers dealt with, but also his style worked very well with British printing presses. Printing presses it was much easier to print items like this than, say, a photograph or more colorful artwork. So how did Sir Bone get so famous? Well, it's because it was easier for his materials to be printed. So the first one was from the Somme. This is from Vimy Ridge. You can see the theme there. And then, of course, in the trenches, all very close together as far as the theme and the feel of these documents, or I'm sorry, this artwork. So you can see, compare and contrast this artwork, whether it's recruiting posters designed to get soldiers into uniform, or if it is artwork designed to show the rest of the world just what the soldiers are dealing with. All of these are primary source materials that are right there in the AHEC collections that are digitized on our toolbox that teachers can use in their classroom. So with that, I'm right at about 40 minutes. So we've got questions. If we've got any questions, you can throw those in the chat and I'll answer them. Let me remind you, I am a historian, so you might not get the right answer, but you will probably get a very long answer. And to recap, as we look for chat room questions here, the AHEC is the Army's archives. We support many different audiences across the board. Today, I've specifically been talking about our education team and specifically how we work with teachers. Keep in mind the Army's history is not just military history, it's American history. We've got plenty of primary sources, and we are always willing to work directly with individual educators to work on lesson planning. And then, of course, we are a good spot to stop if you need help interpreting military history. We're just a phone call away on that, and we can definitely talk with you. And of course, we've got on-site and off-site professional development. I definitely want everybody, especially you teachers out there, to know that if you are looking for an internship, if you're looking to work with these primary sources hands-on, talk to me about interning with me over the summer. We can get you in elbow deep into the collections at AHEC to look for the stuff for your classroom and help us develop our online presence for teachers. All right, so it looks like we have a few questions here. We have a question about students possibly setting up a digital outreach program to soldiers who are already in the field. You know, I've never gotten that question, Sherry. Soldiers who are in the field are notoriously difficult to get in contact with. You can definitely email me. I'll see if there's any other programs out there that are doing something similar. We've not really thought about that sort of contact between soldiers in the field and students. There are, of course, plenty of letter writing organizations that you can write letters to soldiers that go out. When I was in Baghdad a million years ago, I got letters all the time from students. But yeah, go ahead and shoot me an email, remind me of that question, and we can see if there's any way to get active digital connection between soldiers that are in the field and students in the classroom. All right, next question was, will Army Heritage Days take place this year? I'm not sure if it's officially out yet, but it looks like Army Heritage Days will not be taking place in May as normal. I believe the decision now is whether to postpone it to later in the year or just wait till next year. So you're going to want to keep an eye on the AHEC's website. Best way to get to that is www.usahec.org. USAHEC.org, our events page on that website will let you know if we have rescheduled or if we're just waiting till next year. All right, link for the toolbox. Okay, let me go ahead and go back to the toolbox link so you can jot that down. And then, of course, if you go to our website, our main website, usahec.org, if you scroll down to the bottom of our homepage, there's a big button that says Educators Toolbox. You can click on that, and that'll take you straight to this same URL that I have up on the screen right now.
Carl, I can send everybody the slides. I have all their contact information, so it'll provide some hard copies for them.
There you go. You can use that as well. Definitely worthwhile to take a look at our homepage, though. There's a lot of great information there as well. Don't confuse the Educators Toolbox with the Military Toolbox. The Military Toolbox is specifically designed for my work with soldiers. Feel free to go into that toolbox and take a look around, but it's not going to be nearly as useful as the Educators Toolbox. All right. Okay. That looks like the questions we have. Give another minute or two for any more questions. One of the great things about the toolbox, so when you do get on there, back in the 80s, well, 70s and 80s, the Army Heritage and Education Center ran a program called This Week in Army History. And we created literally hundreds of these small one-page vignettes that had to do with military history. I have all 300 odd of those vignettes in the Educators Toolbox. Definitely worthwhile to look at those. Some of them would just make absolutely amazing activators for the classroom. One of my favorites is how the Turks attempted to adhere cannons, old-fashioned cannons, to the sides of camels, and ride the camels into battle just long enough to fire those cannons. Needless to say, they could only fire once. It didn't work out very well tactically, but again, there's a very interesting vignette on that one-page vignette, and you can find all different topics in those military history vignettes. So definitely worthwhile to take a look at those as well. And again, those are in the toolbox. So I got a question from Kevin about the staff rides. So the staff rides are open to teacher groups. If a group of teachers can get together, especially from a single district, get in contact with me and schedule with me. I've done this several times. It's a really amazing professional development experience. For those of you who do not know what a staff ride is, a staff ride is where somebody like me takes a group of soldiers out to a battlefield. So call it Gettysburg, Antietam, even Valley Forge, which isn't technically a battlefield. And we talk about things like leadership and professional development, and personal relationships, and the tactics of what happened on the battlefield. And we really get to look at ourselves and our organization as it relates to what happened on the battlefield. Again, it's designed for soldiers, but I've found that a group of teachers can get a tremendous amount out of these staff rides, because in the end, really, high school teachers are working with the same people that our non-commissioned officers and our officers are working with. There's not much difference between an 18-year-old private and a 17-year-old senior in high school. So there's a lot of personal professional development, looking at another way of teaching, et cetera, that we can do out there on the battlefield. So yes, if you can get a group of teachers, between 5 and 10 teachers, we can work out a staff ride specifically for the professional development of those teachers. So hopefully that answers Kevin's question. Let me go down through here. Kanda Lectures for educators using different courses. So we have talked about doing that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we can't work directly with Pearson or Carnegie. However, Mike Perry might want to be able to work with them. We do take all of our lectures that we do at the Army Heritage and Education Center and put those up online on our YouTube channel. Those are our perspectives in military history lectures and our Brooks Kleber Memorial lectures. So you can take a look at those. We try to get those out as far and wide as we can. And then, of course, I like the idea from Len there to maybe look at creating lectures specifically that teachers can use in a specific course. So we'll definitely look into that, and we'll especially talk to Mike Perry about that, because that could be very useful. All right, I've got one from Jen. Jennifer Jones. Can staff writes be done by a group of military history and American history curators, not educators? Absolutely, Jennifer. We love to work with our partner organizations. We are partnered with the Smithsonian, with the National Council of History Education, several other organizations. It's just a matter of organizing the staff ride. So of course we can definitely work with you if we can find the right time to get your team up to one of those battlefields. All right, we have a question about research. So Stephen, your question about research, we get this sort of question quite a bit. Your best bet on that, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to help you directly, but your best bet on that is one of two things. First, you can talk to the Army Heritage Center Foundation. Mr. Perry and his team have researchers that can help you out. But we also have, of course, at the AHEC, we have a volunteer corps that helps folks do research in our collections. So if you go on our website, go into the research section, you'll find a link for asking questions. Feel free to jot down what you know about your father and his time in Vietnam, and they will assign that to one of the volunteers to help you find what we have at AHEC, as opposed, like you said, to the National Archives or one of the other repositories. So that can help you out. You can get a little bit more targeted help from our foundation as well. And of course, if you have additional questions, Stephen, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm not going to be able to help you directly myself, but I can definitely get you to somebody who can. All right. Lynn, I'm not sure what an RFP is. Mike, do you know what an RFP is?
It's a request for proposal. I'll reach out to Lynn and find out exactly what she means, and we can work with her.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right.
I guess that looks like it's it.
Sure.
Anything closing, Carl?
Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for listening today. Hopefully, if you're not a teacher yourself, please, please, please get in touch with the teachers in your life. Let them know what we do. One of my main goals is to not just help the teachers, but also to expand that toolbox. So what I really need help with is for teachers who use our materials to get back to me with the products they create so that we can get that up on the toolbox for other teachers to use. That Educators Toolbox is truly driven by the teachers that use it. So if you do use material from our collections, if you do talk to me about materials, when you get done using it, or if you know of a teacher who could use it, let them know when they get done using it, send me what they use so that we can get that repackaged and put back up on the toolbox for all the other teachers around the country that use that toolbox. All right, that's about all I've got.
Thanks, Carl. Let me just highlight tomorrow, we have Mr. Jeff Hawks, who is the Education Director for the Foundation. He'll talk about the resources that the Foundation has on its website, slightly different than what the AHEC has. We focus more extensively on creating soldier stories that might provide useful in the classroom or for use elsewhere. And then I just want to let you know about upcoming lectures next week on the 21st. We have a lecture on the Vietnam War. On the 23rd, Mr. Brooke Blades comes back to talk about the end of the war in Europe and VE Day. And then coming in the last week of April, we have Hal Moore, just went blank here again.
Galloway.
Yeah, Joe Galloway, who's going to talk about combat leadership based upon Hal Moore and other generals he worked with as a featured speaker. So please look at our web blasts that we're putting out so that you can sign up for these lectures, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you much.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, I will end it.